Number 2 on our new business list is the presentation by the Economic and Civic Development Department staff on plans for the old Castro Valley Library. So this should be fun.
Piper, I'm sorry, but did we miss or maybe I got in later. Did we miss the part about the Native American land acknowledgement?
We're going to do that in old business. It's number 2 in old business.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
I just had a quick question. Was there any public comment regarding Lorena Avenue aside from Mr. Bowe?
Sorry about that. You're right. I should have asked.
If any member of the public has any comment about the Lorena Avenue item, please raise your hand. There are no hands raised.
Okay, so who do we have? Eileen and Jamie? No, Eileen and
Susan.
Susie. Sorry. Susan. Okay, yeah. Great. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
We're going to get a presentation from you guys, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I know that you've been tracking along with this project and our historic Lorenzo Theater as well. So it's nice to be back and catch up with the commission. I'm Eileen Dalton. I work for the Community Development Agency, Economic and Civic Development. And we've been working on the sort of reuse plans for the old Castro Valley Library. I've got a little short PowerPoint on our feasibility analysis that I'll share, but before I get into that, just to set the stage, sorry I wasn't at your last meetings. It sounded like there was some discussion that occurred. There's been, the old Castro Valley Library has been vacant for a while, and I had some involvement in looking at the reuse of the building back when we were a redevelopment agency. The redevelopment agency spent some time and energy looking at potential reuse options for the library. We were going to acquire it and potentially redevelop it. Redevelopment unfortunately went away at the end of 2011, and we no longer, the agency dissolved. We're still unwinding some parts of that, but there was no longer any funding to proceed with any reuse of that building. So we sort of just left it, walked away. And there was, quite a lot of community input when we were looking at it because it was vacant and potentially available. So that our efforts sort of went dormant. The Castro Valley veterans organized and worked really hard on preparing a plan to potentially reuse the library for a veterans service center, and got some traction with the MAC. And to make a long story short, ultimately the project came to our board in March of last year, right at the beginning of the pandemic, with sort of some options, and the board took some action. And sort of nobody was really happy with the veterans certainly weren't happy with the result, but the Board of Supervisors directed the Community Development Agency, originally the General Service Agency was the lead on the project, but they asked CDA to pursue the reuse of the old library. I keep saying theater because that's on my mind. The old library for a reuse for both affordable housing for veterans and a space for veteran services, sort of to combine both of those urgent needs into one space. So the board handed us that direction very clearly, and we started off, and Chris Baser, who's the director of our agency, asked me to take the lead on the ascertaining feasibility of the site, with ultimately, the goal to move forward one way or the other. So that's why I'm involved. It's kind of an odd project. We have our Housing and Community Development Department that does the affordable housing, but we've been bringing it along. So, there's, again, a lot of history with the building and a lot of interest in its use. Our charge from our board was to see if it was possible to kind of provide both veteran services and affordable housing. So what we did was hired an architect, Kava Masi, who does quite a lot of market rate and affordable housing. We hired him to do a massing study, and the massing study will, and I'll share some of this with you, but just to give you a little overview, the massing study came up with a couple of different density options for the site. No real design, but just sort of, sugar cubes on a block to show sort of what could fit on the site. So that was the first piece of work. And all of these steps that I'm describing have been done in concert with the veterans group. They've been sort of our steering committee. So once we analyzed, what can fit on this site on Redwood Road, everybody knows where the building is. The next step was to retain an economic consultant. We used Strategic Economics, very well-known, respected firm, to help us assess the feasibility of those massing studies. And so the feasibility study was really to answer the basic question: if we went out with an RFP for a project that required affordable housing, would serve veterans and some veteran space for their use, would we get any responses? And so the answer to that question from our feasibility analysis was yes, there's interest. And then I'll kind of step through what we looked at and why. So we can't guarantee what the response would be or who would respond to an RFP, but they did some due diligence on whether or not the site was feasible. So I'm going to share my screen just to step you through what that feasibility study covered. And then obviously there's a couple of other factors that would have to be considered for the site before we did an RFP. And one is, the building's over 50 years old. We know it's, it needs to be analyzed. So we'll talk about what we're doing about that. And then also there's the overlay at the state legislative level is the Surplus Lands Act, which really dictates how the county deals with surplus property. So I'll talk about that too, but maybe just quickly, if you bear with me, I'll share my screen and give you a little, this is actually Strategic Economics presentation that they did to the veterans group. So we've gotten to you a little early before we've gotten to our other public group. So you'll be, more than welcome to follow us along as we go forward. There's more iterations of the work that we're doing. So you're kind of at the early side, which is great. We will be going to the Castro Valley MAC and the Unincorporated Services Committee meeting, possibly as soon as July. So the study purpose for Strategic Economics was really to evaluate the feasibility of a development on the site. And the goal is affordable housing targeted to veterans and ground floor space for veteran services. And again, all these steps we've gone through so far have been in concert with our veterans group partners. The approach was, this is for Strategic Economics, to interview. They had many interviews with affordable housing developers, our county staff. They also talked with veteran services providers as well. They looked at funding sources, and they looked at a lot of veterans affordable housing projects in the region, and they did quite a nice analysis of those as well. The development concepts that they used to sort of vet the project with the development community were the three that Kava Masi came up with. And essentially they are in three options. It's basically applying the RMX zoning. So coincidentally, the project you just heard from in the neighborhood has that same RMX zoning that was placed there from the general plan. Because this is a county facility, it's a library, it actually has public facility zoning. So the zoning for the site would have to be changed to RMX, but the RMX zoning is what completely surrounds the library, and including that house you just saw on Lorena. The options that CAVA looked at were sort of small, medium, and large. The smallest was 28 units, 3 to 4 stories, 7,470 square feet of veteran space, and 40 parking spaces. And so you see as you go up, and these include, the first option is the RMX zoning with no density bonus. Option 2 is with 35% density bonus, and option 3 is 80% density, and this is for affordable housing. So it goes 28 units, 36 units, 52 units, ranging 3 to 6 stories. The consistency in all the projects is that the veteran space is maintained at almost 7,500 square feet, and the parking spaces are 40. And obviously all these massing options are taking, basically a vacant piece of property with no building on it. So scraping the building and starting from scratch. None of these options have the library building retained as is. It's not feasible to add housing on top of that existing building. Moving on. So the smallest option, which was the highest preference for the veterans group if you're going to do something there, is really the least feasible because it's small. Affordable housing developers have sort of a minimum building size to make the site feasible for construction costs and overhead and management. It's a little more challenging for a developer to pursue. However, we had a few local developers say that they would contemplate pursuing a project of this size. Some of them because they had other developments in the area which would help with management. But that makes the pool of interested folks pretty small for this small size. But it was, our consultants were surprised, as were we, that there was some interest from more than one on that small size project, 28 units. The option 2, which is the 36 unit project, is more feasible than option 1. However, again, it's a small size for a project. So if you look at all the sort of comparable projects of this, acreage or this and this type, they're generally around, 50 to 60, more like 60 units. So this again is like half the size. The smaller size option is what would probably work as permanent supportive housing, meaning there's targeting extremely low income veterans, so really small units and a lot of extensive on-site support. So that's another possibility, and there was interest in that. Probably the highest feasibility, just because of the size, is the 52 units. It's kind of more fits in the sweet spot of affordable housing development. It's a little more efficient, but obviously it becomes a pretty large building, and the context of the neighborhood becomes, it's a little more extreme as far as, imagining a 6-story building where that old library site is located. We did also get some feedback that, again, the massing studies that the architect did, again, were just massing studies. And we did get some feedback from some of the developers that based on the unit size and placement, they could maybe get more units in a building with less stories. So some of this is still yet to be figured out when an actual proposal is made, should we get to that point. Some other key findings is that a project like this can deliver that ground floor shell space. It's more likely to be delivered, it's more efficient in the larger project. It will probably require some additional subsidies to carve out that space on the ground floor. And that defining that space and who's, ultimately who's gonna be programming and using the space. So who's the nonprofit or who's the organization that's gonna rent it is pretty crucial. And the more the better it is for a development going forward. That's the end. I'm going to stop my share for a second. And I just wanted to ask Susan to give you, I think what you're more interested in is how we're going to take into account the historic assessment of the building. And so I'm going to have Susan give you the update on that.
Okay, great. Make sure I'm off mute here. Yeah. Well, Yeah, thanks, Eileen. And I want to thank Linda, who called a while back and asked a really great question, which is, were we going to look at do a historical evaluation of the library? And the answer is yes, we are. And I think you probably all remember when Jamie Orfanos and I came in a couple, oh gosh, that was pre-pandemic, and we talked about the Lorenzo Theater with you all. And we mentioned ARG, which is Architectural Resources Group, ARG. Terrific firm that's very well known in the field of historic preservation and historic architecture. And we, as we explained at the time, have contracted with them to work on the Lorenzo Theater, and they're terrific. So we reached out again to ARG, and we're having them do a historical evaluation of the Old Castro Valley Library. And let me just go through the steps that are in their scope of work. And you all have been through this 1,000 times, but just to go through the process real quick, it's a very typical historical evaluation of a property. They'll do a site visit. They'll do that background research. And they're going to be looking through the lens of, is it eligible for the Federal Register, the California State Register, and any Alameda County designations or lists of significance. Finally, they'll produce a draft, and after review, we'll produce a final report. They will have up to probably 3 opportunities for them to present at a public meeting. Could be your commission, planning commission, board of supervisors, whatever, but we'll have them available for explaining in detail their findings. Again, these are the experts. They're just the perfect people to do this work, and probably take them about 5+ weeks to do this research and to produce a report for us to review. That's really the highlights. Do you all have any questions about that?
This is Linda.
Mhm.
Eileen, thank you for presenting today. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
I have a couple quick questions, and then I have some comments when it's appropriate about the research that the PRHC subcommittee has done on the historic value of the property too. So Piper, let me know when it's a good time to
Now is a great time.
make a couple comments. Okay, so first of all, questions. So the architects, did they visit the building at all before doing the people who did the feasibility study, did they visit the building at all?
Yeah, they did an external, they didn't go inside the building, but
Okay.
their charge was to do a massing study for mixed use, and they did look at the building and adding residential to it, and it wasn't an option for them. They actually came up with one plan that had a standalone building for the veterans, but it still required the demolition of the library to have a standalone building in the front and sort of like almost like townhomes in the back, really, really low density.
Okay.
Yeah.
And has the PRHC received the full feasibility study from your office?
No, and actually got distributed to the public. It really wasn't intended to. I shared the feasibility study with our veterans group, and it got released.
Mhm.
It is a public document. It will be made available. I'm happy to share it. I really wanted the feasibility study to be in the context of a staff report to our board, and it kind of jumped the gun and got out there. So you can find it, and I haven't, in the summary of it, I've just presented, and you will get a copy of it too.
Okay,
Happy to, it's super detailed, and I'm happy to share that.
Okay,
But, yeah,
great.
you have not received it yet. I'd like
Okay.
to really have it as part of a staff report.
Thank you. So that's the end of my questions. So I just want, when this came up at the last couple of meetings, I and 2 other people on the PRHC were part of a subcommittee to kind of look at the history of the building and see what we could learn. And our findings, again, we haven't made anything formally written yet, but I'll just read a couple paragraphs if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So we're considering the building a historic and cultural resource for the community. We feel it's eligible for the California Historic Register for two reasons. One, because it's a mid-century modern building that were built between 1945 and 1969. And Susan's probably figured out already, but that's now, that type of architecture is now recognized by scholars and museums worldwide as a significant design movement, and that the style emphasizes structures with ample windows, open floor plans that open up the interior spaces to the outdoors. And that is basically what the library looks like inside. And even though it's been vacant for some years, it is still, we believe, it still has architectural integrity. So in other words, it's still what it was when it was built. Historically, it served as a strong role in the social and cultural life of the community, being that it was the first library that was an actual building and not a converted chicken coop, which the original library was. It was fully paid for by a local parcel tax and sales revenue from local sales taxes in the unincorporated community. Total amount was $309,260. And the building served the community for 46 years until the new library was built in 2009. The architects who designed it also designed the Our Lady of Grace Church in Castro Valley and the Castro Valley Community Center. According to the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, all projects using federal dollars must be reviewed and commented on by the California Office of Historical Preservation. And so I assume there will be federal state dollars to develop the property as affordable housing if that happens. So that's basically where we're at. The question is, if this property is not developed as affordable housing, what's the plan B? Would there again be, I know Castro Valley is very short on meeting space, and in addition to the veteran services, which everyone welcomes happening in Castro Valley as a central location for veteran services for Alameda County, and also acknowledging that housing for veterans is of course urgent as well. But is there a plan B that would happen if the veterans housing wasn't developed and the building were preserved?
Good question. We're working on just the board's direction right now. We're not working on backup plans at this point in time. So part of our charge is to take our board's direction to pursue the direction that they gave us, and bringing along all the information that we will develop and glean as we go along. I did want to mention the Surplus Lands Act, just to add another layer of important information. And we've learned about this because of our Lorenzo Theater as well. The surplus, and it's changed over time, right? When the veterans first started working with the county, the rules have changed. Really, all of any property that the county has that could be surplused for a use has to go through a pretty tight funnel to make it available for affordable housing pursuant to the Surplus Lands Act. Mm-hmm. And this is, the Surplus Lands Act has really limited exemptions and very strict guidelines. Even for example, our Lorenzo Theater, which is on the California Register, it is our only historic preservation designation in the county as far as its zoning. It is on a piece of property that has no, the building pretty much takes up the footprint of the parcel of property. There's no parking, there's no extra land. And we've just now are in the middle of the Surplus Lands Act with the Lorenzo Theater. There was no exemption for a historic theater. We still had to offer it for affordable housing.
Amazing.
So yeah, it is. We looked and looked, and we asked several different attorneys, and then we looked some more, and there's just no way around it. So we're in the middle of a process where we've had to offer the Lorenzo Theater as a surplus land to affordable housing developers. No one has bid yet because it doesn't make any sense. So
Okay.
there's that. I mean, we haven't had anybody come to us to say like, we'll want to make this project happen, because we don't see how they could. But so with the cast, I just share this with you because we're super familiar with it, that, you know, part of this process of evaluating the site, and ultimately what could likely happen is an RFP is issued, or we go through the Surplus Lands Act process to determine, because we have to welcome affordable housing developers. It's only after that Surplus Land Act process is complete and no affordable housing developers are interested, or ones that are interested we can't come to an agreement with. That's the point in time where you start talking about your plan B, because you have to legally satisfy the Surplus Lands Act process. So part of the analysis that we'll be doing for our board is to sort of recommend how we're going to accommodate that Surplus Lands Act process going forward with a solicitation. There's no road forward that doesn't go through this little funnel for affordable housing. So that's
helpful, and that's, yeah, and I understand, and that helps to explain what it is. I think the consequence, unfortunately, is going to be that any historic building is going to be a really tough sell to have any historic preservation, if that's the case, that everything has to go through this. But I do have one more question. So getting into the weeds of the Surplus Lands Act.
Yeah.
Does it have any, is there any, I'm trying to think of the right word, any impact due to the fact that Ruby Meadow will be developed as affordable housing, pretty likely, I would think, in Castro Valley, as well as incipient plans for the Presbyterian Church?
Oh, for Trader Joe,
to develop 100 or 200 affordable housing apartments on the Trader Joe's side in Castro Valley, and then the library on top of that. Is there any coordination? None.
There is no, it's really, I mean, you could be in a sea of affordable housing, and it doesn't take into account other projects, other locations. It's pretty cut and dried. There are a few exemptions, but the only exemption the county would have available to us is one where we did an RFP for affordable housing. So it's, either you go through the process or you go through the exemption and do an RFP for affordable housing. But no matter, really, there is no other path forward, even with a historic on the California Register theater. We couldn't find any other path forward. That really doesn't take into account exactly what you said, other developments, other locations. No, it's pretty single focused.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Okay.
Yeah, sorry to, I mean, from what I don't remember who somebody was just, thinking out loud that this process seems to be getting even more and more restrictive the more time that goes by. It's not easing up, it's getting more focused. So, again, this wasn't in place when the veterans first started having discussions with the county. And now today, I mean, there's no path forward to work with the veterans. Even if the board decided that was the best thing to do, they changed their mind. We still have the Surplus Lands Act that we have to accommodate. Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll be real interested in hearing what Susan learns about the historical assessment, and we'll continue our work, and I'm sure we'll get back together on this soon. Okay.
Oh, sure. We'll definitely bring the assessment back to the commission.
Great. And thank you again for your time today.
Yeah. And thank you, Linda, for the background information. We'll pass that along to ARD, and that was really helpful. So
Okay.
thank you. That's
I
great.
have a quick question on the Surplus Lands Act, and thank you both for your presentation. I'm curious as to the time frame that a property needs to be made available. You had mentioned the Lorenzo Theater, and there hasn't been any bids yet. Is there a window?
Definitely. Good question. Susan, correct me if I'm wrong. We had to make the, there's a whole set of guidance, and we had to distribute the notice to affordable housing developers that have registered with the state of California. So there's a whole list online. And then we had to make it available for 45 days. Is that right, Susan? 60, sorry, I'm making it shorter. 60 days. And in that 60-day period, if nobody indicates interest, then we're done.
Okay.
If they do, it moves us into an additional 90-day
Right.
period of time for negotiation. And the Surplus Lands Act doesn't prescribe an outcome to the negotiation, right? But it does prescribe a process, and it's pretty public. And there's the state HCD has a big role in like reviewing what you're doing. So you can't fake it. You can't just say, oh, we'll negotiate, and really not. You really have to negotiate in good faith. You don't have to take a bad deal. You know, that's part of the law that doesn't require you to do a deal if they're saying, well, if it's unreasonable, but it's slightly uncharted territory too. I think we're all just figuring this out because this last round of restrictions came into effect in 2020. So it's fairly recent. So that's the timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question too. I was curious as to, it seems like our primary interest in this is in trying to preserve the existing building.
Right.
But you said that the building, it is not feasible under any circumstances to keep the building. Is that a design issue? Is that about the architect, the designer for or has this been determined that it's just absolutely unfeasible to keep that building?
Let me just be really clear. We didn't analyze the building to retain the building to reuse it. We did as the redevelopment agency many years ago, and we found lots of ways to redesign the existing building and to reuse it as like a community center. The current exercise that we're working on was direction from our board to pursue affordable housing and veteran services on that site. And the architect, there's, it's a small site. There's a small parking lot. The building takes up much of the site. There's no way to develop affordable housing on or around the existing building. It would have to be torn down and redeveloped in order to get any kind of housing on that site. Now, as for whether it could be reused as is, we didn't study that for this effort. I'm not saying that it isn't feasible to keep the building, but it wouldn't be for that combined set of uses.
Okay.
I have a few questions also. For the veterans housing, what you're proposing is that, am I correct that it's temporary housing rather than permanent housing? Like they would be in it for a period of a few months to a few years and all rental housing? Or is it, would it be owner occupied?
The actual proposals are still yet to be determined, but based on the feasibility analysis, in any event, all of the options for affordable housing with a nonprofit partner would all be rental. It wouldn't be home ownership. And it would be permanent in that it would stay there forever, but whether or not it's folks that have come for a short term, I think the envision like permanent, long-term, affordable rental housing. But again, that would be something that would come forward with a solicitation to developers to really determine what they would propose for this site.
And approximately what size square footage of each unit are you talking about? Are these 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom? What's the square footage? And
the square footage is not yet determined. The massing study was just sort of a general look at generally what could fit in the space. So I'd say that that's yet to be determined. They'd be mostly small, I think, smaller units. If, you know, generally with affordable housing, there's usually a range. It's usually smaller units. There's generally a few larger ones for families, if necessary. But that's one of the items that the developer would propose as far as the size. You know, 1-bedroom apartments, 2-bedroom apartments.
No approximate size, 500, 1,000, 1,500 square feet?
Less than 1,000.
Probably less, yeah, for sure.
Less than 1,000.
Well,
Okay.
if you look at, what was it, 53 units into 4,700 square feet? Or 46?
No, that's the 4,700 square feet is a veterans building.
That's
There's
for the
no-
veterans,
Oh.
for their space. I have a plan that I can't read because it's too small in front of me, so I can, when I come back, I'll let you know what the range of unit sizes are.
And one more question on surplus land.
Yeah.
I am sort of assuming that surplus land is land that has not been used by somebody or is not currently being used by somebody. Like the house over on the street around the corner, it's currently occupied, so it couldn't be qualified as surplus land. So what is the definition for surplus land?
Yeah, surplus land is, the county board of supervisors would have to make a declaration that the property is surplus. That's what designates it surplus. So buildings that the county owns and is using are not surplus because they're using them. So it's defined as any property that's not in active use by the county.
Not in active use. Okay.
Yeah. But the county hasn't surplused this project yet, so it's not considered surplus yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a tough one. I've looked at the building, looked at it from Google. I can't get on the property because it's got a big gate on it.
Yeah.
And it's the only reason I haven't gotten on it. I can't crawl that tall a fence.
Good.
You're probably lucky. But on Google Earth, it looks like if you put housing over the top of the parking lot and back, that if you went up 3 or 4 stories, you could put quite a few units up there over the top of the parking lot and leave the building as it is. And I have never seen that being proposed by anyone, of leaving the building and then putting a multi-story directly over the parking lot with a ground floor, being the parking area and everything else above it, housing.
Yeah, the architect that we had look at the site, who designs both market rate and affordable mixed use and rental housing, didn't think that was an option.
Well, without being directed to do that, I'm sure that it would be easier for them to say, well, let's just get rid of this building and build from scratch. But if they were directed to give the building some consideration, maybe they could think outside the box and creatively design something that would work. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we don't have, I think Susan and I don't have a dog in the hunt. We're just we've been asked to pursue what our board directed us to do. And we haven't guided our consultants to have an outcome. We've asked them to just, start answering these questions. So I'm relying on the expertise of the folks that we've hired that we think are very credible and reliable.
Yeah.
And none of the, I don't even think anybody, and I know some of them are listening, any of the folks from the veterans organizations pushed that issue. There's nobody that thought the building could remain and housing could be built around it. Not, I don't recall one person feeling like that wasn't an avenue that we didn't pursue. So I feel good that we didn't miss anything there.
Okay, now, as I understand from Susan, the ARG is going to come out and look at this site and do a historical analysis on it. Is that going to be a HABS report, historical architectural building survey, or just an EIR?
It's, so they're calling it a historic resource analysis.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great question, Al. It's a little bit of a, hybrid, and we ask that they do a thorough analysis of this as a historic resource. And so it picks up elements of a building. So it picks up some elements of some other approaches, but based on their recommendation and the scope of work, they're calling historic resource analysis. And we think that really captures best a very thorough look.
When I went out and looked at it, I was impressed with large overhangs over the windows and stuff, which is typical of one of the developers, architects that was here in this area, and Porter or something like that. And also the skylights on top of the building are unusual skylights that I've not seen on any other buildings. And so I was impressed with both of those historical artifacts. So I would be very interested in seeing that report. And I think that's a good next step.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Whoops, and I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's a historic. I should have said evaluation and I used analysis. So I thought it's HRE, not HRA. Sorry about that. It's historic resource evaluation. Sorry about that. Got my acronyms wrong there.
Thank you very much for your presentation, ladies.
Yes.
I have one more question, Piper, if I can.
Go ahead, ask.
Okay, real quick. So we're getting a historical resource evaluation. There's been a feasibility study, and there'll be some more architectural information. So my question to Eileen is, at what point, and I'm sure it's very premature right now, but what point is there an analysis about the impact on the community, given that this is housing for homeless vets? And there is a high school within 3 blocks and a preschool and another school a couple of blocks away. And so I would be really interested in what supportive services would be offered to the vets in this building, especially mental health services, drug and alcohol addiction services, job training, etc., because that would be a pretty big impact on a community. If those services were not present for people who obviously have been struggling on the streets and now will be in housing close to schools, downtown, preschool, etc.
Yeah, good question. So typically that kind of analysis will happen with any future land use approvals. So the sort of steps that we would likely go through, do the historic resource evaluation, develop based on the results of that, possibly ultimately leading to an RFP, a request for proposals, for an affordable housing developer to make a proposal for a project on the site, given whatever mitigations are required under the historic analysis, feedback from the community and the vets on what services they want. Then we'd solicit for a development proposal. If it's competitive, we have a selection process, select the preferred affordable housing developer, then their work starts and they would have to make an application to the planning department for the project, and it would go through the normal public process where those questions of that developer would be vetted with the public. So it's a couple steps down the road.
Okay.
But it certainly would be part of, I think, an RFP for this population, and these uses are unique, and that we'd want to make sure the RFP made sure that whoever responded understood what the community's concerns were in those areas.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And when the veterans came and made a presentation to us a couple of months ago, they suggested that they would move their Veterans Resource Center that's in Oakland now down to Castro Valley. How difficult of move, what they have to do to have that happen?
If you're talking about the county services that are offered in Oakland, the veteran services,
yes,
we've had conversations with with that county agency, and they confirmed that they would not move their facility out of Oakland into Castro Valley in this location, but they certainly would provide services at the location because that's their job, is they have folks that provide services in the community, and this could be a location where they'd staff services, but they wouldn't move their operation from the Eastmont
Okay.
Center to this location. That was part of our sort of analysis with strategic economics, is asking a few of those questions.
Now would the veterans then pay rent on the building for the use of the building?
You know, that's actually a really good question. And that's part of what strategic economics pointed out, is probably there needs to be a little more work on how that 7,500 square feet would operate. Because that's what the housing developers will ask, is like, okay, who are we partnering with? And, you know, how much, you know, rent may be nominal, but there are costs to operating a space, you know, the common area maintenance, parking, utilities. So figuring out how much subsidy goes into that space would probably dictate the rent or the lack of rent. But those are issues that are still outstanding because we haven't got to the point of the RFP yet, but those are really important questions that we need to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Any
you.
other, and anyone from the gallery have any comments about this agenda item?
If any members of the public would like to speak on this item, go ahead and raise your hand.
Okie dokie then.
I see no raised hands.
Okay, and so again, thank you for the presentation, and we'll move on to our old business now.
Do we have to take action on this of any kind?
No.
This was for information only, so there's no
Oh, okay.
action.
Okay,